Okay. All right. Shoot. All right, everybody. I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Larry Thomas and Monica Hadarits. They'll be speaking to us today about how beef is a conservation and sustainability solution in Canada.
You want to get into presentation mode there? Yeah.
Yeah, just a sec. All right. Okay. Go ahead, Larry, whenever you're ready.
Okay, thanks, Ian. And thanks, everybody, for dropping in today. John had asked me if I could bring the PHJV policy folks up to speed on some of the conservation-related things that we at the Canadian Cattlemen's Association, or CCA as the acronym, have been up to, as well as the CRSB. Monica with the CRSB will give an overview of the industry in her segment, but the CCA is the representative body for Canada's 60,000 beef producers, and I'm the environment manager. Today I'll talk a fair bit about species at risk habitat work we've been involved in at the CCA and CRSB, among others, for the past several years through Environment and Climate Change Canada funding, ECCC funding. Then I want to touch on some of the research work the CCA supports or is partnered on related to habitat conservation and the environment. Then I'd like to outline Canada's beef industry's collective 2030 goals, keying on those of environment or conservation significance. And then I'll turn it over to Monica to explain an update on the CRSB activities. Next slide, please, Ian. Perfect. Okay. Initially, I'll explain about the Species at Risk Partnership on Agricultural Lands, or SARPAL-1, as we affectionately call it, project that ran from March 2015 and was completed in March of 2020. The 5-year project was possible again through ECCC funding. And then, as sort of a continuation of the successful SARPAL-1, we've moved into SARPAL-2. Again, a project through ECCC funding that is now underway, and this one, it's a 2.5-year project, and but this time around it's a bit of a different focus, which I'll explain later. Next slide, Ian, please.
Did it?
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. In 2015, with $2.53 million in funding from ECCC, the CCA partnered with Multisar, which is Multiple Species at Risk, arm of the Alberta Conservation Association, also with Cows and Fish, the Alberta Beef Producers, and the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, CRSB, on a 5-year SARPAL project focused in the Alberta natural grassland regions of South Saskatchewan watershed in southeast Alberta. The project focused on maintaining and improving habitat for multiple species at risk, through knowledge sharing, the completion of habitat assessments, development of voluntary habitat conservation strategies, and subsequent implementation and monitoring of beneficial management practices with ranchers in that quadrant in the far southeast. The project brought almost 190,000 acres of ranch land species habitat under conservation plans, including habitat conservation strategies. In all, 24 habitat conservation strategies were set in place, and we engaged with additional landowners who asked us for advice on species at risk habitat. The number of habitat recommendations within these strategies kind of ranged from 15 to 53 recommendations, depending on the group of producers. You'll note on the slide, that we've part of the activities included things like bat condos. There's an image there of a bat condo. Also hawk nesting poles for ferruginous hawks, fencing changes, and a whole host of other things that I'll explain a little bit more in detail here in a minute. These producer-driven recommendations following baseline assessments included things like using a combination of springs or off-stream water developments and temporary fencing to reduce negative impacts of cattle in riparian areas. Again, hawk pole installations in suitable areas for those ferruginous hawks. Weed management recommendations, cattle distribution recommendations to improve range health and protect sensitive areas. And that included some fencing, which I'll explain more in a bit. Native grass restoration and recommendations to mitigate impact to bats or short-horned lizards. Next slide, please. Tasks undertaken across the project included wildlife range and riparian surveys, detailed range transects, range health assessments, tame pasture assessments, and also riparian health inventories and assessments on rivers, creeks, dugouts, and wetlands. Here on the left is a multi-SAR staffer doing a bird survey. In the middle is another staffer conducting a snake survey. And on the right, you can see reflectors fastened to permanent fencing to reduce collisions, primarily focused there on the greater sage grouse. Habitat enhancements included portable watering systems to be used in conjunction with permanent and temporary fencing materials, planting of native shrubs in riparian pastures, native species and range seedings, spring developments to protect springs and provide clean water for cattle to drink that then flows back into riparian areas through buffers, off-site watering systems with self-cleaning pumps placed in sort of alternate locations to avoid northern leopard frogs. Next slide, Ian, please. Fencing to protect coulee systems and improve distribution of cattle was kind of widespread throughout this project timeline, and portable electric fencers were widely used to assist in cattle distribution, and they're very handy to create temporary upland watering sites to reduce impacts along those riparian areas. Here you can see an example of the portable fencing system, though I'm sure many of you are familiar with these. Producers are keen on this type of system as you can use portable fencing in multiple places, and raptors have a hard time perching on the small posts, and so the predation issue is dealt with there on species at risk. And usually there's less headaches with this type of fencing on public lands versus trying to get permanent fencing built there, especially in sage grouse country. Also, the system is nice in areas prone to being washed out, as you can install while the cattle are in and then remove before winter and set up after the spring thaw and runoff. Other activities included the installation of wildlife-friendly fencing, where existing fence intersected well-established game trails. We also did a lot of work on shrub plantings to protect exposed slopes along riparian areas, and also, again, fencing of wetlands and providing alternate watering sites. That's kind of a key one. Additional enhancement included relocating some corrals in various areas away from any creeks and draws that feed into sensitive fish habitat, and wildlife-friendly fencing, again, to reduce cattle impacts on wetland. And again, the target there would be northern leopard frogs. Next slide, Ian, please. Here on the right is a native mix seeded, 120 acres seeded that was conducted in May with SARPAL funding this past year on that program. And as a comparison, on the left is a multi-SAR seeding planted in 2011, immediately adjacent to that May 2021 seeding that's on the right. And it might be tough to see in the image here, but the new seeding image has you can see that there's sage planted in that native mix, which is critical again for many species, and most importantly for greater sage growth. At-risk species that really benefited from the SARPAL included ferruginous hawks, burrowing owls, Great Plains toads, northern leopard frogs, plant, which I don't know what it is, but it's a tiny cryptomantha, and greater shorthorn lizards and several other species. Landowner surveys in the project area were also undertaken, and 91% of the respondents believed that their land was important for providing habitat for species at risk. And when asked what the landowner hoped to achieve by working with multi-SAR programs, 63% said that they were looking to forward to having assistance with land management decisions. Other responses included looking forward to finding out more about range management in the area, as well as finding a balance between species at risk and landowner interests. Landowners were also have also been using their reports during industrial development requests for their land as a means to show just how unique their habitat is and maybe help deter some of that development. It was an extremely popular program with ranchers and farms across that South Saskatchewan watershed area in Alberta, and the program was promoted mostly through word of mouth, especially as it got sort of going. I mean, there were several country meetings that took place, but it ended up being a neighbors talking to neighbors, and in the end, we worked with 24, most of them very large ranches, and brought in 45 habitat enhancement strategies. And the demand for this type of programming continued to increase through the project timeline, and we ended up placing producers on waiting lists and prioritizing properties to work on. And our contractors actually brought in additional staff when needed to assist with completing surveys and implementing rapid assessments to engage folks. Next slide, Ian, please. So last March, ECCC provided $1.27 million to continue on with SARPAL initiative. We call it SARPAL 2. The project area is in the similar geography in Southeast Alberta, but this time the project focus is a little bit different. Under the priority places and species approach, ECCC is seeking to work directly on greater sage grouse critical habitat on private lands, and this is the priority species in the region. This version of SARPAL really has two aspects. ECCC really wants to test the waters on developing term conservation easement approach with landowners that have greater sage grouse critical habitat on their land. And the TCE, or the Term Conservation Easement Program, will define how CCA's land trust partner organizations could efficiently negotiate, purchase, maintain, monitor, and enforce term conservation easements across their full life cycle. And as with the first SARPAL project, we will also continue to work directly with ranchers on habitat conservation strategies and other on-the-ground activities. But the focus will be on greater sage grouse, and we do believe, though, that other species at risk will benefit from these activities. We've partnered again with Multi-SAR, Cows and Fish, CRSB, and the Alberta beef producers, and we've contracted the Alberta Conservation Association and the Southern Alberta Land Trust Society to help us scope out what a TCE approach might actually look like. We have a landowner engagement plan in place, and we'll initiate that this coming fall. And the length of these terms has yet to be determined. It will hinge on the feedback we get from landowners and as to what really works for them, so that they can they'll actually embrace it. Let's see, as an aside, CCA and CRSB are involved with the Pan-Canadian approach on species at risk and developing the agricultural sector action plan through ECCC. That's an ongoing project, and actually Monica is a co-chair on that group. Next slide, please. Now I want to touch briefly on some research topics CCA and its divisions support. The Beef Cattle Research Council, or BCRC, is the national beef industry-led funding agency for research project. BCRC is funded through a portion of the checkoff on the sale of cattle allocated to research, as well as government and industry funding. BCRC funds projects related to environmental sustainability, as well as beef, cattle, and forage research. They recently announced their 5-year research and technology transfer strategy, and part of it I'll explain here. On the environment front, BCRC has funded some recent research projects that are still underway, actually. One is a Ducks Unlimited-led study on prairie ecosystem services, quantifying the contribution of wetlands and livestock production landscapes. The objective there really is to quantify the extent of wetlands and beef production landscapes, and to quantify the ecological benefits of these wetlands, including water quality, waterfowl production, carbon cycling. And there's a couple of projects through AAFC and the University of Manitoba that we are supportive of or had funded through BCRC. One is to develop a regional life cycle impact assessment model for the quantification of the Canadian beef production impacts on biodiversity. And the other is a project on assessment of occurrence of synthetic hormones and beta agonists in cattle operations. Those are growth enhancing products and their associated environments, and a related study on the economic and environmental impacts related to the removal of growth enhancing technologies. There is some findings coming out of that are really quite interesting, just starting to come out now. And then most of you will probably be aware that the federal government announcement recently on research funding through the Nature Smart Climate Solutions, several organizations have brought forward letters of intent for project funding that the CCA has either partnered directly with or have offered support. And these include a project that we're working with the BC Cattlemen's Association to beta test virtual fencing technology. And that really has the potential to be a game changer in the near term anyways, when it comes to habitat protection and enhancement, and in the longer term for wider expanses of this type of fencing infrastructure, as opposed to putting in permanent fencing, which is costly and of course has some environmental drawbacks in certain areas. Canadian Cattlemen's and CRSB have partnered with Birds Canada, seeking funding on a project to create a financial toolkit for producers to increase profitability and avoid conversion of grasslands and enhance biodiversity. This one has a lot to do with ecological goods and services. We also supported the intent on a project to develop a national grasslands inventory. The CCA holds a seat on the Canadian Wetlands Roundtable Steering Committee, and we've supported their wide-ranging intent to evaluate wetlands and move ahead on national wetland inventory, on an inventory among several other important topics. Excuse me. And then there was also the climate action and awareness funding brought forward, organizations with projects intents jointly that the CCA, BCRC, and CRSB have offered letters of support. And these include the Food, Water, and Wellness Foundation in conjunction with the Alberta Biodiversity Monitoring Institute, Manitoba Forage and Grazing Association, Sask Forage Council, and others on a project to quantify agricultural impacts on soil as a carbon sink to mobilize nature-based solutions. Also, the Soil Carbon Roadmap. There's another conservation group called South of the Divide Conservation Action Program, and they have a project that we're supportive of, producer-led solutions for carbon sequestration. And also the Universities of Regina, Winnipeg, Lethbridge, and AAFC on native prairie grassland ecosystem understanding, including restoration and management under different climate projections. Next slide, please. And collectively, the beef industry has set a suite of ambitious 10-year goals out to 2030. These include goals for greenhouse gas and carbon sequestration, land use and biodiversity, as well as water, among others. The industry pledges to safeguard the existing 1.5 billion tons of carbon stored on land managed with beef cattle. Also to sequester an additional 3.4 million tons of carbon each year and reduce the greenhouse gas emissions intensity of the industry by 33% by 2030. The industry commits to maintaining the 35 million acres of native grasslands in the care of producers by keying on the economic viability of producers and through supporting programs that incentivize conservation. We've got to support measures and initiatives that help ranchers earn more revenue off of their native grasslands. And this could include offsets related to carbon, water recreation, biodiversity, habitat-specific practices or stewardships, and much more. Also, the industry targets maintaining the 68% of wildlife habitat capacity within the agricultural landscape supported by beef production. On the water side, our industry commits to promoting practices that maximize water quality, quantity, and retention, and deliver healthier landscapes that can handle drought and flood events. Keying really on improving water use efficiency, we aim to support public and policymakers in their understanding of the benefits provided by grassland ecosystems, including wetland protections, supporting not hampering uses regarding groundwater recharge, including resource development, and emphasized the critical issue of future water supplies for all agricultural reliant families, ranches, and farms. Next slide, please. And finally, a quick shout out for Guardians of the Grasslands. This is an amazing award-winning mini documentary that is now available for public viewing, and I've put up the web link or the web address for that. That was a film produced. It's a relatively short. I think it's 15 minutes or so. Produced on the Waldron Ranch in southwest Alberta, pulled together by the Waldron folks and also Ducks Unlimited Canada and Nature Conservancy of Canada, on telling the story of the critical role beef cattle play on native grasslands ecosystems and the prairie landscapes. We at the CCA are promoting this video through our public and stakeholder engagement team and our senior or our staff in Ottawa to ensure that politicians and senior bureaucrats have the chance to view this great video. For some, we've found it's been a real eye opener, and again, it's an award winner. It's fantastic. And also, finally, this year marks the 25th anniversary of the CCA's National Environmental Stewardship Award, known as TESA. In 1996, the CCA began awarding TESA to producers who exemplify superior environmental stewardship actions on their beef farms and ranches. Each province awards a regional environmental stewardship award, and those regional recipients compete for the national TESA. And it's been a fantastic way to showcase the great work on habitat and species conservation our producers employ on their operations. We have a panel of judges that includes rep from environmental, non-governmental organizations. And our foundational partners are Ducks Unlimited Canada, Birds Canada, and the CRSB, while MNP is the platinum partner. The award will be handed out on September 1st at the Canadian Beef Industry Conference, and this year we have 6 regional nominees, so it's going to be a pretty tough decision for our judges. And so, anyways, I thank you very much for listening to me, and with that, I'll turn it over to Monica. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Larry.
Whenever you're ready, Monica, you can share your slides.
All right. Maybe Ian just confirm that you can see my slides before I start talking.
Yes, I can see your slides.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you so much, everybody, for the opportunity to be here with you today. My name is Monica Hadarits, and I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the CRSB, we are a not-for-profit organization, and we were formed in 2014 after a group of stakeholders got together and decided that the beef sustainability conversation should be housed within one organization. And so we were established, and we have a mission to advance the sustainability of the Canadian beef industry from farm to fork. And we do that through multi-stakeholder engagement, collaboration, communication, and science. And before I launch into the work of the CRSB, I just wanted to provide you with some quick facts about the industry. And so Larry already covered this, but there are 60,000 beef farmers and ranchers across Canada in the provinces, and 98% of those are family owned. The contribution to Canada's gross domestic product is $21 billion per year, and about half the beef produced in Canada is for domestic consumption, and 50% is exported into 58 different markets. And there are about 345,000 jobs created either directly or indirectly through the industry. So a major contributor and a large sector here in Canada. So now back to the CRSB. We're a membership-based organization with representatives from all across the beef value chain and beyond. And I really love showing this slide because it highlights all the organizations that have committed to working together and collaboration and science and moving forward with the beef sustainability conversation here in Canada. So these are all the voting members of the CRSB, and we're at currently over 110 members and observers. We have 3 core areas of work, and I'm going to speak to those in a minute here. But one thing I just wanted to highlight is that the CRSB is part of a network of 11 regional roundtables that feed into the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And that's a very similar organization to ours, but operating at a global level. And all regional roundtables adopt the 5 principles of sustainable beef. So when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about natural resources, people in the community, animal health and welfare, food, and efficiency and innovation. And all those 5 principles are underpinned by economic viability, because you need the social, economic, and environmental aspects to have true sustainability. So these 5 principles of sustainable beef really guide all of the work that we do at the CRSB. So our first area that we work on at the CRSB is what we call sustainability benchmarking. So we hired Deloitte a few years back to conduct a large comprehensive assessment to benchmark the sustainability performance of Canadian beef from farm to fork. And that included a suite of environment, land use, social, and economic indicators. And this was really an important starting point for us, because it helped us to identify, using credible science, where the industry is performing well and where there are opportunities for improvement, because there always are opportunities for improvement. And then from there, we developed a sustainability strategy to continually improve the sustainability performance, which was already world leading, but again, committing to continuous improvement. And then from there, partnered with a number of national beef industry organizations to launch long-term goals that the industry and its stakeholders are working towards together, and that Larry covered them off really well already. And so really this first pillar of work for the CRSB is about measuring and tracking the national picture of sustainability performance in the Canadian beef industry and setting goals for continuous improvement. The second area that we work on at the CRSB is what we call the certification framework. So in 2017, the CRSB launched the first outcome-based certification program for beef sustainability in the world, something that we're really excited and proud of here in Canada. And this is a voluntary program for beef farmers and ranchers to be recognized for their sustainability practices through a third-party audit. It's a tool for retail and food service companies to source from those certified sustainable farms and ranches, and it provides a credible assurance to consumers as well. We have 4 key components of the framework. The first is our standards, and that's really the foundation of our certification program. We have indicators and requirements for beef farmers and ranchers. We have 24 of them, and one thing that's important is that they're organized around the 5 principles. So they cover all those 5 principles that I mentioned earlier, and they're outcome based. So they don't prescribe the practices that producers need to follow. They provide the outcomes, and then producers have flexibility to innovate and select practices that work well for their business. So we have that sustainable beef production standard for farmers and ranchers, and then we have the sustainable beef processing standard that applies to primary processors, and they have 19 indicators that they need to achieve in their audit in order to become certified. The second component of the framework is our assurance protocols, and essentially this is a document that provides guidance on the requirements for certification, and it also provides guidance for the requirements for bodies who would like to conduct audit services on our behalf. So that's the assurance protocols component. And then we have our chain of custody requirements, and essentially these are requirements for tracking cattle and then beef, and then claims about the beef through the supply chain. And then the fourth component is around sustainability claims, and that's really just around what can be said about participation and engagement in the framework and sourcing through the framework. So all of these pieces are available on our website, crsbcertified.ca, if you're interested in learning a little bit more. We've had really great momentum and uptake of the certification program over the last few years. 17% of the Canadian cattle herd is being raised on certified sustainable farms and ranches. We have 4 certified sustainable processors, 4 companies that are authorized to sell beef with a CRSB claim, and 6 companies that are putting the certification mark on product and sourcing through the framework. And our last pillar of work is our sustainability projects pillar, which encompasses a number of different things. So one of the things that we do in this pillar is we provide letters of support for projects that help advance our sustainability strategy. And so we're a very small staff team at the CRSB, but we have a really large network, and we know there's already a lot of great work that's happening on the ground. And so we do provide letters of support for projects that help to advance our sustainability strategy. We also conduct consumer research just to check in with consumers about their awareness and perceptions of the CRSB and around different beef sustainability indicators, for example. So just doing regular check-ins through consumer research. Larry already covered this in detail, but we partner with a number of different stakeholders, including the CCA, on SARPAL project. We also do an annual project survey. So again, we are a small team, but we have a very large network. So every year from April 1st to May 31st, we send out a survey to collect information on projects, programs, initiatives that are helping to advance our sustainability strategy. And those are vetted through our scientific advisory committee and then posted on our website, and then also in a number of other different channels like our CRSB newsletter, for example, that can be featured. And one thing I wanted to highlight that Larry already said is CRSB is really engaged with Environment and Climate Change Canada on the agriculture sector core planning team for species at risk conservation. So we're co-chairing alongside ECCC, and that's a really large multi-stakeholder team that's tasked with developing an action plan that develops strategies and goals to bring together agriculture and conservation to advance species at risk. So that's a really exciting initiative that we're involved in. We have a large team that's very committed, and we're about halfway through that process. And I'm not going to dive into a whole lot of detail on this slide, but I just wanted to highlight that this slide really demonstrates the CRSB's journey since we were established in 2014. And it just really demonstrates how much you can achieve when you work together and collaborate. And so we're really proud to share all of the key milestones that we've achieved with support from our members and partners and stakeholders over the last number of years. And I just want to thank you for your time. There are a lot of different opportunities to learn more. So we have CRSB.ca and CRSBcertified.ca if you want to learn more about our work. Beeffortheplanet.ca was a website that we launched last year that is really consumer facing. So it takes all of the technical information that we have and distills it down for sound bites for a more consumer public facing audience. And Larry already mentioned beefstrategy.com. And then again, I would just encourage you, if you haven't already, to spend the 15 minutes and watch Guardians of the Grasslands to learn a little bit more about the context here in Canada. And then just another call to action is, as part of CRSB's commitment to continuous improvement, we are currently undergoing a review and update of our sustainability benchmarking assessment and also of our certification program. So we're initiating a review and update of both those pillars of work over the next couple of years, and we've started that process. And so if there's anybody that's interested in learning more or wanting to engage in that process, we're happy to have you join us. So thank you very much, and I'll hand it back to you, Ian, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you, Monica. If you do have questions, please feel free to enter them in the chat box or just raise your hand and we'll go ahead and get your questions answered for you. All right. First question. Really great to see the B certification program rolling forward, Monica. Congratulations. Can you please explain how ecological expertise experts is being incorporated in the standards, application of the standards to operations, and the audit qualifications for the auditors?
Sure, thanks, Samantha, for the question. So we have, when the standards were developed, we had an indicator committee that helped develop those standards, and that included about 30 different organizations and experts in that development. We also had 2 rounds of public consultations and then numerous rounds of member consultations. And so we engaged a number of different experts through our consultation process and through our committee work. But again, we're always, open and pleased to have more and more engagement. So if anybody on this team would like to participate in that process, where there's lots of opportunities for comments and feedback. And the audit qualifications, so we do have a requirements for auditors that they need to have certain qualifications to become auditors. And part of that is training in all of the 5 principles of sustainable beef. So they get training on natural resources, people in the community, animal health and welfare, food and efficiency and innovation, so that they're well prepared to do the audit on the wide range of topics that are involved in the audit process. And in the application of the standards to the operations, I would say that that's probably, there's expertise within a lot of the beef farmers and ranchers that's one way. I think there's also the auditors as well. And then there's also some of our certification bodies provide training as well. So that's another way that there's capacity building on that front. Hopefully that answers your question, Samantha.
That appears to be all the questions we have for today. If you do have questions later on, please feel free to contact John Pattison Williams, and he can, or myself, and we can certainly get any questions you have forwarded to Larry or Monica. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Larry and Monica for taking the time to do their presentation today. It was very informative. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank everybody for attending today's presentation, and we look forward to seeing you in next month's presentation. Again, thank you for everybody for attending, and have a great day.
Thanks, Ian. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.